So, a few nights ago, the Detectives Endowment Association came out claiming that three officers may have been poisoned at a Shake Shack with bleach from a milkshake. Now, immediately, a lot of people were very skeptical, and but also there were a lot of people who were jumping to the conclusion that this was 100% legitimate, saying that, oh my gosh, look at these police officers being attacked. It's Antifa. We need to stop this stuff. This anti-police sentiment needs to stop. But then just a few hours later, it was announced by Chief Rodney Harrison that after a thorough investigation, the NYPD's Manhattan South investigators has determined that there was no criminality at the Shake Shack employees. Apparently, what happened was they had cleaned the milkshake machine, and I guess a little bit of the remnants from the cleaner got into some of the milkshake, and the cops had a sore tummy because of it, and they claimed that they were poisoned. So this is a ridiculous, ridiculous story, and actually, though, I think it does touch on quite interesting themes in our society, the way in which the story was immediately spun and played. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how the people who are looking for wrongdoing in these kinds of situations seem to be on the side of really supporting the police, right? The people who are always bringing up the riots, trying to make the protests being about rioting, and then here trying to make it look like there's some kind of nefarious actions going on against these police officers when it's completely reasonable and apparently the case that there was no malintention here, just maybe sort of incompetence. I mean, I spent over 9 years waiting tables. I saw a lot go on in restaurants, and it's completely plausible to me that someone just wasn't paying attention to what they're doing, and a little cleaning solution got left in the little shake tin, or something along those lines, or just a lot of people in those industries maybe aren't paying attention to what they're doing and maybe don't care that much. So it's completely reasonable that this kind of thing could be completely accidental. So jumping to the idea that it was definitely a poisoning seems to be a bit much. I mean, you can't really mess around with poisoning people with bleach because you could end up killing somebody,
And,
right?
and then
So
not
it's
get, and then like that, the idea that you wouldn't, no one would have seen it. You were pouring bleach into three different
yeah.
milkshakes in an open kitchen, like in a Shake Shack. I mean, it's ridiculous. And the way in which, though, the police officers jumped to the conclusion, the first thing they thought is, I have a sore tummy. I must have been poisoned. I mean,
Right.
that kind of mentality, that victimhood complex that's going on in the minds of these police officers here, and in the fact that it was immediately taken seriously, not just by the media, but also by the investigators. So these cops are like, I had a sore tummy from getting a milkshake. That means maybe I may have been poisoned. Let's launch an investigation and try to figure this out. We've got to uncover the Antifa bad guys. And then, we saw Fox News headlines. We saw headlines all over the place warning and talking about how this endowment association came out with this tweet talking about it. I mean, it goes to show you that there's this real mentality among a lot of people out there of let's just believe the police, even though it's quite
Right.
clear from this incident in the same case that there's a lot of police officers who have this victimhood mentality about themselves, that everybody's out to get them, that we're the loners out here, that we need to keep ourselves safe, and we need to be protected as much as possible. We need all the protection we can get. I mean, I've had a milkshake that gave me a bit of a I had issues with afterwards. I didn't jump to the conclusion that someone was trying to poison me. I mean, the mentality behind that, I think, is quite revealing, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just a common case of our common case in our society now, where people are sort of trying. They want to believe a thing, and so if they think they have evidence for something, they're immediately going to jump to it instead of waiting, for things to be investigated. I mean, that one of the things that happens with, I've seen it in restaurants I've worked in, and if you start looking when you're in most corporate restaurants, like most big name restaurants, you're going to see there's cameras all over the place inside these
Right.
restaurants, right? And that's not just on the customers, that's in the kitchen area, on the line, everywhere where people are doing stuff. It's probably being videotaped. So the idea that someone in one of these corporate restaurants could try to get away with poisoning something, I mean, they know they're being filmed. So it's pretty unlikely that someone would even try to do something like that.
Yeah, that these low paid workers, underpaid workers, that, oh well, they're the real villains here in this situation. The ones with the guns, the ones with the power to enforce, the ones with this qualified immunity, the ones with all these protections
Right.
and privileges, that these people are the victims, that these people need to be immediately believed firsthand, that's a problem. You see it all the time. There might be 2, 3, 4 witnesses for a particular incident. Then the police officer says another thing, and the person who was getting arrested says another thing, and then they go with the cop. They go with the cop when
Right.
multiple people are testifying saying actually it was another way. But when you think about it, you want to sort of pull yourself out of it. The person who's more likely to be biased, who's more likely to be biased? A standby witness who was just walking by and saw something happen, or the officer who knows that if it turned out that he
Right.
was arresting for a wrong, he or she was arresting for a wrong reason, that they're in trouble. And if anything, you should believe the cops less. You should believe the cops less than you believe
Right.
a bystander. But the instinct, the bias that we have in our culture, in our society, is to believe law enforcement. Why should we believe law enforcement any more than we believe other people? I mean, I said there that we should believe them less. Let's just believe them the same. Let's just believe them the same and see how that plays out. See how that plays out. And, I think it really goes to show you this, sort of deep problem. The other thing, though, that I want to get your opinion on here is how it became immediately politicized. It wasn't just that there
Right.
was a lot of people out there who were like, okay, let me believe the cop, let me believe the cops. But the way in which the people who were wanting to believe the cops tended to be on one side of the political fence because of a kind of tribalism in which it justified their view, it justified their opinion that people are out there to get the cops, that this mentality going around of anti-police, right? This idea of defunding the police or abolish police might have created a kind of toxicity in the air, made people more aggressive to police officers, right? That it almost seemed as a sort of byword, or not byword, but a kind of a sort of shorthand, an example of why we shouldn't be talking about defunding the police. I think I found it quite insidious, quite insidious.
Yeah, and I think part of it comes back to this idea of this 24-hour news cycle where stations need something to talk about, right? They need something to fill the time for these 24 hours a day of news that has to go through. And as we've seen, many news stations at this point do have a political agenda that they're trying to fill. So if you find something that looks like it's going to fit your political agenda, you'll throw it in there, right? Because it gives you something to talk about. And if it's something like, if it's showing up on a news channel where that's the only news that those people get, then you can possibly change some minds, which leads into some of these instances. I wonder how this really plays out in the court of public opinion, right? Because when you hear about this kind of thing with the shakes, and then it turns out, oh, it was just someone was cleaning the thing, and then it sort of puts an emphasis on the fact that, oh, all these protesters are actually acting very appropriately, right? Once we separated the riots from the protests, you go, oh, actually there's really good behavior going on here. Once you look at the shake thing and go, oh, well, this isn't really what we thought at first. Actually, no one is trying to poison police. You realize that a lot of these people are acting very appropriately, right? There's not these
Yeah.
nefarious acts going on that people are trying to drum up.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, I will say one of the points you made there was how it seemed to be one side of the network which fits your agenda. We also saw like MSNBC, the so-called left-leaning network, running with this story. So maybe you're right to point out the 24-hour news cycle, how this is, really clearly like a non-story, and so they decided to run with it. And it's definitely dramatic. People poisoning someone. I mean, that's Game of Thrones levels. Game of Thrones
Right.
level stuff here. But it goes to show you, I think, this deep cultural bias in which we just immediately believe law enforcement. We just immediately assume, well, because they are law enforcement, because they are powerful, they must be telling the truth. When, if anything, we should be inclined to believe the less powerful person. We should be inclined to believe the weak. We should be inclined to believe the poor. In Catholic doctrinal theology, there's this idea known as the preferential option for the poor. And it's really interesting, the way in which we just immediately reject the idea that we should believe the poor. It's always assumed that, the petty thief, that's the person who's lying. That's the person who's lying. And it's really sad to see.
And I mean, we've seen it in the last few weeks. I've seen a lot of tweets and a lot of people saying things like, "Well, if you don't want to have a bad interaction with the cop, then just don't do anything wrong, right? So that's another way in which you're already looking at the fact that, well, if a cop is talking to a person, they must have done something wrong. The cop must be
Exactly.
talking to this person for doing some type of very bad behavior. You must be guilty. And it's just the start of the event. There hasn't even been an investigation or a trial or anything. Just, oh, if cop is talking to you, you must be guilty.
Exactly. And so then every time you do anything that's, perceived as anti-police, you must be in the wrong by default. But we've got to zoom out. We've got to zoom out. I mean, this is one of the things I like to talk about when it comes to any kind of police interaction. Always zoom out. Did the interaction even need to happen in the first case? Because if the interaction didn't need to happen, then you can, sort of forget about, you don't have to remember or think about the way in which the action then transpired after the fact. Just ask, did the interaction even need to happen in the first case? And did it need to happen in the way that it happened? Because oftentimes what you'll find when you start inquiring, to start thinking about things in that way, is that maybe the interaction didn't need to happen. Maybe the way in which policing is occurring is the problem, and then you end up with people resisting arrest. You end up with people, so-called fighting against the police. Even though, of course, the police officers are the ones with the gun, right?
Right.
So it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, man. So anyway, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to go over and check out Chris's channel. It's Political Perspective. All right, you guys. See you all in the next one.